Imagine standing in an operating room, surrounded by senior surgeons, as you're handed the responsibility of keeping a patient alive. And in that moment, you make a mistake that could have cost them their life. That's exactly what happened to me at the start of my final year as a med student. Let me take you back to the day I almost failed a life-saving procedure. It was the beginning of our surgery rotation, of time when everything felt intense and new. My classmates and I were standing in the OR, eager but nervous, as we were there to oversee a laparoscopic cholecystectomy. That's a routine procedure for the senior surgeons, but for us, it was a whole new world. And by the way, for the non-medical people out there, lap chole means gallbladder removal. As the procedure was about to start, the senior surgeons casually asked us what we wanted to do. You know, the typical, what are your career plans question. When I mentioned I wanted to become an anesthesiologist, the senior anesthesiologist there looked at me with a simple smile and said, "Why don't you come over here and help out?" Oh my God. He asked me to help him. And I thought in my head, sure, how hard could it be? First, he handed me the laryngoscope and asked me to intubate the patient. I could feel my hands trembling as I approached the task. At that point, the thought of potentially causing trauma to the patient's pharynx was terrifying. But somehow I managed to do it without any issue. Crisis averted, or so I thought. But then, he handed me the ambu bag and asked me to hold the mask and airbag. I thought, all right, just hold this in place. Got it. But here's the thing. I didn't realize I needed to keep pushing the bag to actually ventilate the patient. For what felt like an eternity, I just stood there, holding the bag still, completely unaware that the patient's chest was paralyzed from the anesthesia. Suddenly, the anesthesiologist turned to me and said, "You need to keep pushing the bag or the patient won't breathe and they'll die." Literally die. And I stared at him and I'm like, my heart dropped. I was literally holding this patient's life in my hands and I didn't even know it. I immediately started compressing the bag, pushing air into the patient's lungs, but the shock of what almost happened had me paralyzed with fear. So I guess you could say both of us were paralyzed, the patient and me. Okay, sorry. Thankfully, the anesthesiologist was a jolly guy and seemed to be in a good mood. He guided me through the rest of the process, making sure the patient was stable. And once the procedure was over, I was relieved to see that everything turned out fine. The patient was okay and no harm was done. But that moment was a huge wake-up call. It made me realize just how serious this job is. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement and nerves, but at the end of the day, it's about the patient's life. There is no room for mistakes, and that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. So that was my near miss, my first real scare in the OR. It taught me that even as a med student, you have to be prepared for the unexpected and always stay focused. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about learning, it's about being ready when it counts the most. That day, I learned that in the OR, there are no small rules. Even as a student, you can be handed a responsibility that might seem simple at first, but in reality, it's anything but. The stakes are always high, and there's no room for complacency. I mean, even in my case, every action or inaction could have had a life-altering consequence. I still can't help but replay the events in my mind over and over again. What if the anesthesiologist hadn't caught my mistake in time? What if I had been too slow to react? These what-ifs haunt me for not days on end, but ultimately, they also push me to take every moment in the OR more seriously, to never let my guard down, and to always be ready to act. And that's the thing about your final year of med school. It's not just about observing or shadowing anymore. It's about stepping up, making decisions, and sometimes facing the very real possibility of making a mistake. But it's also about learning from those moments, about growing into the physician you're training to become. Because when we graduate and become doctors, there won't be anyone looking over our shoulder to correct our mistakes. We will be the ones responsible for our patients' lives. And yes, it's terrifying, but it's also exhilarating. Every time I step into the OR now, I'm reminded of that day. The day I almost failed a life-saving procedure. It's a constant reminder that this profession is as challenging as it is rewarding, and there's always more to learn. So, what's your takeaway from all this? If you're a med student, especially in your final year, tell me how you feel about this. I hope my story resonates with some of you. These experiences, as insane and scary as they are what prepare me every single day for the real world of medicine. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've had a similar experience or any thoughts to share, drop a comment down below. And don't forget to subscribe for more insights into the life of a med student. Stay safe, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next video. Allah Hafiz.